All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to the Sports Innovation Lab's data-driven sponsorship discussion. My name is Gina Waldhorn and I am Chief Operations Officer of the Sports Innovation Lab. We're here this morning because the sports industry is really known for putting on the world's most thrilling live entertainment and sponsorship activations. But when it comes to data, brands, we believe, have really still been flying rather blind. We've addressed the shortcomings of the sports sponsorship landscape head on and revealed an innovative new roadmap for instituting advanced sponsorship models that we believe can be designed to create exponential returns and deliver truly breakthrough fan experiences. And we published that in our report, which was launched last month, called Data-Driven Sponsorships. And we're here today to dive into some of the key themes of that report, and specifically do that with some esteemed guest leaders in the industry who are the driving force at their companies for pushing for some of those innovative new approaches to sponsorship. So we're thrilled to have our guests, Augusto Elias and Kevin Hogan from Coca-Cola Company and Google joining us today. So as we get started, first, I would love to introduce our moderator today, Josh Walker. Josh Walker is co-founder and president of the Sports Innovation Lab, where he stewards the lab's work with some of the industry's leading properties, teams, and brands, including the NFL, NHL, FIFA, Cisco, Visa, Facebook, and more. Under Josh's leadership, Sports Innovation Lab has released groundbreaking research, like the report we're reviewing today, which we use and he uses to really empower brands to implement game-changing breakthrough fan experiences. A former vice president of research at Forrester, Josh was responsible for launching the company's Forrester Wave Evaluation Framework. And Josh is also a serial entrepreneur, having launched several companies which really pull on his passion for data and technology in the sports and media industry. So Josh, thrilled that you'll be moderating for us today. And after Josh goes through a couple of big ideas from our report, we're going to welcome our guests, who I'd love to introduce as well. Today we have with us Augusto Elias. Augusto Elias works for the Coca-Cola Company as the global head of advanced hydration. The portfolio of brands he manages has a 20% share of a 21.7 billion retail value global industry. He oversees consumer and business strategy, innovation, and global brand communication. Augusto is passionate about innovation and consumer-centered design. He loves sports and believes they're a metaphor for life and one of the many avenues for personal growth and development, and we couldn't agree more, and we're so honored to have Augusto joining us today. And joining Augusto is Kevin Hogan. Kevin Hogan joined Google in 2018 to manage strategic brand partnerships for the Google Cloud business. After studying at Loyola University Chicago, he's held marketing positions at Outside Magazine, The North Face, and today Google. And Google Cloud is a service platform built on Google's private network and is the product of nearly 20 years of innovation in security, network architecture, collaboration, AI, open source. I think we all know and rely on Google Cloud. And they're technology-first partnerships with a variety of organizations across sports, media, finance, and nonprofit. And Kevin is truly the driving force behind some of their most innovative partnerships. So thrilled to have Augusto and Kevin with us today. I'm going to hand it over to Josh, who's going to bring us through some of the big ideas behind the report and then open the discussion with Augusto and Kevin. So Josh, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Gina, and appreciate that setup. We have two phenomenal guests today, so it's my job to set the context for you all and then get to them so that we can learn more about how they approach this industry. For many of you who have heard our previous reports or some of the research that we've done over the past year, we try to purposely put data and evidence out into the marketplace that is provocative and pushes people to think differently. This report was no different. And it's met with a tremendous amount of skepticism in the industry. So it's really, really valuable to have this healthy debate on whether or not this report really does show that there's a new future coming or not. So those of you who've heard my background, I came to this industry from market research, from data. And when I look at industries to see if there's true fundamental structural change that's coming, I look at it from a data perspective, and I look at it from both sides of the market. I look at the supply side and I look at the demand side, and I push my team to try to find evidence on either side of that equation that something really big is about to happen. And we think in the sponsorship market, there's something that's brewing that's going to fundamentally change the business model over the next decade. And that's a long period of time, but you can see it starting to happen today. And that's why we have Augusto and Kevin joining us to talk more about it. We fundamentally believe that sports properties and brands need to do more to compete in the digital marketplace. And why we believe that is because there are a lot of companies like Facebook, like Google, like Netflix, like Twitter that are collecting first-party data and commanding the attention of the consumer. If the sponsorship marketplace does not actively participate in collecting data and learning more about those consumers, they're going to be at the whim of other brands who are doing that better. So the path forward is data. And what we mean by this very specifically is that all the large activation dollars that the sponsorship market spends in sports should be used fundamentally to try to collect more information about the consumer so you can personalize the experience and anticipate what they want. What is it that the fan wants to do? And why do they want to do it? If you look at the traditional sponsorship market in sports, it's on-site activation, it's category exclusivity and entitlement and naming rights, and it doesn't make brands smarter about these questions. So we have really looked at this entire industry and said, is there something happening here? Let's take all of the actors that could potentially be change agents and let's see how they approach sponsorship today. Why aren't sports properties pushing harder on this? Why aren't athletes fundamentally changing this model with endorsements and other things? And this slide walks through all of those different stakeholders and gives you a real good understanding of some of those disruptive forces that are coming, that are brewing, that are fundamentally challenging the way that we think about not only spending dollars, but measuring the value of those dollars that we apply to the market. And that led us to a conclusion that we can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to allow the sponsorship market to continue to operate as it is, but give each of the types of sponsors that are out there a roadmap for success. So we broke down the sponsorship market into three clear types of sponsorship where data could play a much more active role. The first type is association sponsorship. And for many of you, you'll recognize this. This is putting your logo on something. Yesterday, I tweeted out that this yogurt was the official yogurt of the NFL. That's association sponsorship. That's putting your brand next to the brand of a property and getting that sort of association and alignment with that property. Right now, you gain very little data from those sorts of brand impression-based sponsorships. But there is technology, surveys, gamification, mobile stuff that you could use in these activations to gain a little bit more visibility into what the fan wants and how they're interacting with your brand. Then you have activation sponsorships. And activation sponsorships are when you think about like a big tentpole event, the Super Bowl, the World Cup, something that's really big where you put a lot of dollars towards it. Those experiences usually have a pregame, during game, and post-game sort of mindset. Instead of just focusing on making sure you maximize reach during the event itself, think about how you can build an activation that captures the fans before the event, their journey into the live event, and then what they're doing to socialize and share after the event. And that way you'll collect more behavioral data. And then the final thing that we think is what's really starting to emerge is what we call platform sponsorships. This is where technology companies partner with properties and brands and build something that has a multi-year platform approach, which is where you're starting to activate sponsorship in a way that gives you data not only before, during, and after the event, but from one year to another. And that is really where we see big players like Google, and that's why Kevin's here today, big brands like Coca-Cola, and that's why Augusto's here today, having a much more active role in building experiences that can start to build audiences that you can activate and grow over time, communities, data-driven communities that we understand more fundamentally as an industry. And that's why we always turn to this graphic to try to get our clients in the mindset of sponsorship is not about game time. Sponsorship is about the entire fan journey before, during, and after an event. And platform models really do expand the envelope, the time period with which your brand is exposed to those fans, and the amount of information you're learning about them gives you much richer behavioral data to work with in the future. So with that, I'd like to invite both Augusto and Kevin on, and we can talk about exactly how they are taking a fundamental and different approach to this, because their brands are so relevant globally. They are having to learn about different fan consumption models globally. And we know from our own research that the way that a European fan, that an Asian fan, that a North American fan interact with sports through mobile, online, linear broadcast is completely different. And we also know that in the period of COVID, there's a tremendous amount of urgency to create virtual events in communities that take advantage of the dollars that they've already spent with the properties they work with. So with that, I think this photo says that Augusto, you're going to talk first, because she's certainly not holding a laptop with a Google box in it. That's a Powerade. Augusto, just by way of introduction, how has your world changed in terms of thinking about sponsorship, collecting data about consumers, and learning more about them? You and I have been working together for a few years now. I know that you run innovation for Powerade. You've had some really cool think tank events with your team globally. How are you trying to change things, mix things up so that you guys approach this industry differently?
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you guys for inviting me on this very important topic. And certainly it's a topic that is going to be around for a long time in any industry or anybody that is focused in sports and purposeful physical activity. So just to kind of contextualize what I do, I am in charge of the Powerade brand and some other brands in the advanced hydration category. I play a relatively small role in the Coca-Cola ecosystem. We have a lot of other subject matter experts that work in media and sponsorships. Many of them, whom you know, Josh.
Yes.
I hyper focus on managing the brand and focusing on the consumer. So I want to say that from a brand standpoint, we are the smaller player in this field. Obviously, there's a bigger incumbent, and so we need to be really scrappy and thoughtful and innovative in terms of how we approach this space. And to me, there is the way I kind of oversimplify the world is you have participants that actually do sport or purposeful physical activity, and then you have audiences that consume sports being played by other teams through different types of media. I'll talk about both, but I'll focus much more on the athlete, because I think just by the nature of what I do, we have a product that serves a purpose with athletes. The world is changing, and COVID has certainly brought that to a much finer point. I want to say that the market is not settled, right? Where there's no dominant design, there's no dominant model on how we should focus on sponsorships, but there's a couple of guiding principles that I personally want to follow. So some of that is kind of driven by the title of this presentation, data-driven sponsorship. Right? So to me, data-driven, we have to ask the question, data for whom, right? Is it data for the demand creators or the supply creators? I think our focus has to shift a lot more on the consumer, right? How can we use data that they share with us to bring value to their experience and to their lives? That's the first thing. And I think the notion of sponsorship, the name sponsorship, I think has to evolve. To me, it's more about a partnership. It's a partnership between the brands, the media, the marketing asset, the team, and fundamentally at the center the consumer has to be there. We have to partner with them. We have to ask their permission to encroach in their lives and to value. So kind of tactically, how we're dealing with that is we're experimenting in different ways to add value. So, as the Coca-Cola company, we have played in the traditional kind of sponsorship partnership models through, global assets like FIFA and the Olympics, some regional ones, and then some very local ones. And that will continue. I think it has a very important place in our arsenal of how we interact with the consumer. But I think more and more it's about building a one-to-one partnership with the consumer, be it the viewer or the participant, and finding ways to add value. And part of that is data. Data allows us to personalize the experience, to personalize the service, and to either bring products or experiences that are hyper-focused on that particular individual.
I love that. Let me pause you there, just because I want to bring in Kevin. You couldn't have set him up any better, honestly. The data-driven for whom, right, and the value exchange for the consumer. So let's show quickly what you guys are doing, Kevin, with cloud, and then I'll set this up just briefly so you don't have to brag too much. But what Google did was they went in and they helped Major League Baseball really collect all their archives, go through them all, categorize them, and then create a fan-driven experience where they could actually make playlists of their favorite players, etc. It's a very cool concept that is, I think, just in the first inning, pardon the pun, but it's like so cool to see that this is coming, and it touches on exactly what Augusto just said, which is if you're going to ask me for something, right, Kevin, if you're going to ask me for something, give me something back. Give me something in exchange. And so I think what you're asking the fan for here is, what are their preferences? Who are their favorite players? Who are their favorite teams? Who are their favorite, events? What are those moments? And then I'll give you something in return. And I just wanted to layer that in here because I think what's underpinning this conversation is something we talk a lot about at Sports Innovation Lab, which is GDPR, and the whole idea that now regulation around data is coming. But Augusto, you touched on it so perfectly, and Google has this at their core. They're starting to really allow you to see all the information Google has about you as a fan. You can go on to Google and you can see all your search history, all your viewing history, all that stuff. And what I think this film room is a perfect example of is how Google's now trying to let you know what the value of sharing that information with them can result in from a terms of personalization. So Kevin, do you want to touch on what's going on here with Major League Baseball and your role at Google?
Yeah, happily. Thank you. And thank you for having us again. I'm happy to brag because, to be honest with you, there's such a huge team at Google that's behind this, both from a cloud standpoint and then broader partnership. So here to represent, but definitely not taking any credit here. So, but yeah, Augusto, you couldn't have set it up better. I think what Film Room is a true partnership, right? It's an MLB product that is powered by and built on Google Cloud. So when you think about sponsorship, and I love how you kind of reframed it as partnership, it couldn't be more true. Like, we are literally providing the tech tools for a property to ultimately build and create a new experience for fans. So, you really did, Augusto, hit it. I think creating kind of fans in the center and building around it and using data for a purpose, right? Like, you have to have, don't set out for data, set out for insights, and then build upon those insights based on the reactions of fans.
And the thing that Film Room demonstrates as well, and I think it's some of the recent stuff that Coca-Cola has done outside of just Powerade, is with the concert series and things that you guys have done in response to COVID. There's a technology platform that underpins this, right? That the partnership with the property is really one of co-development. And Augusto, I want to give you a chance to sort of chime in on that. Like, are there properties that you work with where you believe you've achieved or are getting closer to that, what you would feel is more of a partnership?
Yeah, great question. I think, like I said before, there's no dominant design in the marketplace for any of this, and everybody's doing experiments with more or less success. I think we are in learning mode with our experiments. Kind of the other thing is we work across the world. And we have different types of markets in terms of development. So what works in one market may not work in a different market. I think the underlying theme is that we have to find the right balance. There is no silver bullet. I think there will be a number of tools that we use in order to do that. And what's important is that we need to be agile and iterate as we learn throughout this process. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, and it also touches on, I think, what Samantha's question is, and she just chimed in here. It brings up the question of metrics, right? If we are in learning mode, if we are in experimentation mode, what questions are you looking to answer through, whether it's sales lift, right, brand lift, awareness, actual data, points that you're collecting. And I'll start with you, Kevin. I mean, when the Google team is working on things like Film Room, how much of it is driven by, hey, let's go hit this metric, right? And what would be those metrics? Is it usage? Is it views? What are you looking for from an indication that you're onto something?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the yes is the answer to all of those. So I think the way that we look at partnerships, we base it on kind of the value we're bringing to customers. So we look at partnerships as also customers. Like, are we enabling them to achieve their goals? And if so, then their usage of our platform will be robust enough. We're looking at from a brand impact standpoint. So depending on where we're at in the marketplace, as Augusto mentioned with Powerade, we're number 3, right? We've got AWS, we got Microsoft, and you got Google Cloud. So coming into that position from a Google standpoint is pretty interesting and unique, and you have to be a little scrappy.
Yeah, you're not used to being a challenger brand.
Yeah,
right?
Like, hey, what's a little chip on our shoulder. But I think the point of the matter is figuring out what we care about at that moment. So whether it's competitive differentiation, and then we could kind of lean into that and track metrics against it from a brand standpoint. And then really the third one is kind of more on the raising sales overall, and that's what strategic impact are we having, and how does this demonstration show the path to other businesses to solve? Not everyone's a league and has to deal with 30 clubs across the country, but you certainly could have a decentralized workforce and trying to manage them and try to organize. So we're trying to draw parallels to the sports world from the business world.
And Augusto, I mean, there's metrics that Coca-Cola cares about. There's metrics that Powerade cares about, but there's metrics that you care about as a leader, right? You have your top 3 or top 4 that you're always looking for to know whether or not you're doing the right partnership.
Yeah. So ultimately, so let me get kind of tactical. So to me, whenever we do a partnership, the first thing I look for is consumer engagement, right? Are people going to the site? Are people interacting with the concept? That's the first thing. The second thing is some kind of metric about bringing value to their life, right? So it's what are you bringing to the table that will add value, and that will vary depending on the program or the promotion. Third piece is stickiness. Do they come back? Do they come back and interact and continue to draw value? And ideally, you should have a virtuous cycle where the more they interact, the more value you're able to give, either through machine learning or through giving them, strategically more value, unlocking more value for them. Ultimately, these things will drive what we call brand love for Powerade or whatever brand we're focusing on. And we have some internal metrics that measure brand love longitudinally over time. Then ultimately, what you want to do is have financial return on investment for your brand. And that's, in many ways, that's harder to measure on CPG brands because you have, you're doing a lot of things that are commingled and are interacting that ideally should be holistic and give you a 1 + 1 = 3 scenario. But ultimately, what it comes down to is engaging with the consumer, with an individual consumer, adding value, and maintaining that consumer in your franchise versus another franchise.
And I love both of your brands for the reasons that you use these soft but really powerful words. Like Google talks about helpfulness and magic, and Coca-Cola talks about joy, and you just touched on like adding value. And it's like it could be like this, and you can measure that over time. And it's like this. I'm not a marketer, but I'm sure there's some real science that goes behind that. And it's something I can't get my hands around. I like touching things, but that's hard. Anyway, Katrina asks, can the film room be applied to other sports footage, Kevin? And really just most specifically is this something that when you were selling the concept internally at Google, you were like, hey, this is to demonstrate machine learning. This is to demonstrate our ability to, do cloud processing, blah, blah, blah. Like we could do this anywhere. Was that part of it? Or was it really just about solidifying some value that you promised the MLB in the partnership?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, as much as anything, it was their desire to use their archives. So, we've done similar things with the New York Times with photo editing, and so bringing their archive to life. So I think that it certainly could be applied. I mean, there's some universal truths in there from a technology standpoint. It's got to be desired from the property itself. So MLB's MLB's a tech company who does baseball, and they've got a small army of engineers who were working on this. So them bringing this to the forefront and us just kind of almost boosting it along was kind of our role. I think it could be absolutely replicated, across other sports properties or other businesses.
I wonder if they made you play a few games of Stratomatic before you built this. Yeah, no, I'm dating myself. But anyway, if you don't know what that is, you better check it out. Augusto,
right now.
Augusto, on the human performance side of things, right? Again, that's a whole new area of value exchange. The idea that you said, the athlete's the center, brand love is important, giving back to the consumer is really relevant. What data do you think Powerades in a position, you're a hydration guy, but what data do you think is at your disposal to give back to whether it's the youth sports athlete, whether it's the amateur athlete, or whether it's the elite athlete? How are you approaching that and looking for partners to help you activate in those areas?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I could talk for hours on this. Ultimately, this is at the center of what I do. How can we bring value to athletes? And so, it's hard with CPG, right? Because you're dealing with atoms, not bytes. That's the first thing. Secondly, when you look at CPG, the value chain and the data is owned by many people, and some of those kind of steps don't share data. So you have the consumer, then you have the retailer, the bottler, and then the manufacturer. There might be more steps in between. But what we're trying to do is a couple of things. In hydration is funny because, first of all, it's really hard to measure. Secondly, scientifically, it takes very little dehydration for it to actually affect your performance in a physical way and in a cognitive way. Kind of the third thing is, for the most part, you have something that nature gave you called thirst, right? So when you feel thirsty, you drink. Now, for the elite athlete, that where every second, every inch, every pound matters, where we can bring value is by giving them him or her bespoke feedback, real-time feedback on their hydration status, right? Just like you have power meters for cyclists, heart rate monitors for other athletes, and so forth. So what we're experimenting with is a way to give performance athletes real-time, accurate data on their hydration status pre, during, and post their event, and then giving them a bespoke solution. So a sports drink fundamentally is water, some carbohydrates, and then electrolytes, right? And depending on the intensity and duration of your workout, you will need different levels of electrolytes and different levels of carbs. So what we're trying to do is measure an athlete's hydration status pre, during, and post, then giving them feedback real time as to when they need to rehydrate, and then giving them the right formula for their particular bout of sport. So for example, the example that I use, if you're doing a 30-hour yoga session in an air-conditioned room versus you're running a marathon in a Georgia summer, your hydration needs are going to be different. Yet most CPGs just give them one standard formula, which is wrong. So that's kind of the experiment that we're working on, and that's what I mean by partnership, right? And data driven. They give us data. Mm-hmm. We use that data to give them back a value solution that is disproportionate to what they've given us in the first place.
Well, Jim asks a question that I think could be applied to this. He's asking about 5G, and like now we're like into a buzzword, right? 5G. But I want to apply his question to a number of different potential emerging technologies. Let's not just dive into 5G, although I'm sure we could talk on hours about the potential of having faster networks in the mobile world. But just what you were talking about, Augusto talks about wearables, right? Like sensors and collectors and things. So there's all kinds of emerging technology. And in fact, Google's putting out a lot of it with Google Cloud and machine learning and things like that. How much do you guys spend of your day really focused on what's coming next versus executing on the here and now? Like, do you have a team, or do you have time in your day or your week set aside to figure out, okay, what's my strategy if 5G is coming? Or what's my strategy if this new, hydration patch is available? Or what if everybody's, doing their own video production in the cloud? Kevin, you work at a technology company. Like, is that something that creeps into your day-to-day, or are you guys fully executing on this Major League Baseball thing and you're like, yeah, would love to, don't really have time?
No, I mean, it's omnipresent. Thankfully, there's people way smarter than I at Google that can really look into the crystal ball. But yes, absolutely, we are constantly thinking about it. The lens that I'm thinking about it through is much more partnership specific, just based on what we got going on. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. You think about really the power of once somebody gets onto cloud and gets their tech stack in line, the opportunity is endless from what.
So let me try to nail you guys down on this. Yeah. So given the whole portfolio of things, and Jim definitely wants to know about 5G, but don't bias your answer based on this question. Is there one thing that you guys see coming that will fundamentally change the way you believe you'll interact with consumers from a sponsorship, partnership, sports perspective, right? Let's keep it in that little box, right? Small box, but Augusto, do you have one thing? Kevin, do you have one thing?
Personalization, I would say, is the one thing. I think personalization, certain tools of machine learning, AI, you can kind of go down the list, but getting to that level of I am a fan and I want it my way. So that's democratizing.
Well, you're definitely singing Angela's language, my co-founder. She's just over the moon about this idea that it's 2020 and we still can't personalize our sports viewing experience, right? And especially for those people who want to follow niche sports or sports that don't get enough attention by the mainstream media, female sports, that is the thing that's really kind of at the core of that. So that was you get 10 points for that answer. You want to try to up them, Augusto?
Yeah, absolutely. So I certainly agree that for me, for my little kind of neck of the woods, wearables and fitness social networks are going to be key. And undergirding everything is AI. Certainly these, for me, in the sports drink industry, sports fuel industry, these things are absolutely key, and I do spend a lot of time on this. So I spend less time looking at what's happening in front of my face, but where is the industry going? Where do we need to be in 3, 5, 4 years from now?
Cool. I'm also just perusing these questions in addition to people complimenting your cat, Augusto, who made an appearance behind you. It looks like most of the people are still, most of our audience is still focused on this concept that there's one thing that could help drive your decision-making process internally. That when you boil everything down, when you're meeting with a property, when you're meeting with a potential partner, that when they say this or when they show you this, it's kind of the switch that flips for you guys, where you're like, okay, this is the right thing. I know that's hard to do, but I also believe that it's fundamentally true, right? That what we are driven by a focus that we have that's kind of either embedded in us because of the culture that we work in, or because we know what we know success or opportunity when we see it. So Augusto, when you think about the briefings, the demos, the pitch meetings that you've been in over the last 12 months, given COVID and everything else that we're going through, is there one thing that could go through the door right now and you'd be like, that's what I needed, that's what I wanted to see?
Yeah, we all want clean, tidy answers, right? And unfortunately, there aren't. At least from my
That's just
perspective.
sober. That's the sober reality. I know it.
Right? There's no silver bullet. Again, there's no dominant design in any of this. Where the market is fluid. What you have to do is experiment, truly experiment. But if you were to push me, fundamentally, what you have to, a couple of things that go to my mind when I evaluate something, right? One is, who are we adding value to, right? It fundamentally has to be for the consumer. And then within the consumer, a lot of it depends on how engaged they are with that property or with that sport. Are they light users, heavy users? Are they passionate about it? If they are, how will this concept or this tool add fuel to that passion? If they're not highly involved, well, are we over engineering this? So that's one element. Second element is, how are we going to measure this, right? There's lots of measures. Usually properties will come to you with executional measures, right? That's great for the property. That's great for me. But what I need to measure is the consumer, their reaction, their perception. How do you do that? That's another important layer. Third piece is this a one-off, or is this something that you can build upon and contain and create a sustainable relationship, right? Because usually these things include a lot of work up front in terms of financial investment, opportunity cost of your time and your team's time, right? If you're going to do this as a one-off in one space, in one geography, it might not really warrant the investment. So how scalable is it, right? And kind of the third piece, there's like what I call old media and new media, right? Old media is your traditional TV, out of home, all that kind of stuff. New media is basically your phone, right? How is this going to apply on your phone, on your tablets, whatever? How can you integrate the concept into their lives in the way they consume media? And of course, different cohorts, different demographics consume different mixes of media. If you're looking for the future, really the future is kind of here. It's kind of in the smart home and smart appliances. So how will that translate into those form factors?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most succinct answer that I could have gotten from you, because like this is it. This is it. And this is the tee up for you, Kevin, because you guys are playing here in ways that I don't even think most of the market understands, right? You've got Pixel, your phone, you've got home, you've got search, you've got audio and video assistant kind of technology with YouTube, and you can serve up anything. So the personalization point you made earlier, playing on what Augusto just said, is like you've got now distribution for sports that they never had before, right? The ability to go into the home and in a positive way create the hype for game time is both an opportunity and a very scary thing for an industry that relies on live sports, right? Now, of course, you could execute in the home in a way that a sponsorship drives people to get in their car or into the subway and go to the game, but you could also create such a compelling at-home experience from a personalization standpoint that they never want to go to the stadium anymore, right? So when you're talking with Major League Baseball, and you could pick any sort of opportunity that Google has, how are you thinking about the different product areas that Google, multi-billion-dollar businesses that sit side by side? How much of that collaboration happens when it goes to working with sports? Is what you're doing just purely a cloud initiative, or is it cloud with an eye toward home, with an eye toward Pixel, with an eye toward anything else that you can bring to the table with YouTube, etc.?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just really quick to rewind to the last question. I think we go through a similar process, Augusto, but I think to dumb it down, it's like, so what, right? So what? Why would you do this activation? Who benefits from it? And like, if you can't answer that in a millisecond, then like, it's got to go, because it has to be simple enough for it to get legs. But
so just again, I appreciate you doing that.
Yeah.
It's like when you're evaluating a new opportunity, ask the question, so what? And if you can't answer it, move on.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
Sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. No, I appreciate that.
So yeah, so to your second question around cross collaboration at Google, I mean, we, again, most of our world is focused on the cloud. We've got most of my specific world is focused on the cloud. We've got super folks kind of thinking, more cross collaboration. And I think that it kind of all starts with the cloud is our kind of philosophy. So having cloud as kind of the cornerstone, you can then build upon it. And to your point on the phone, that becomes your remote. And I don't know that I totally agree with you, Josh, in that it makes in-person events or experiences obsolete. I think if anything, it enhances it, right? So I'm in the Bay Area, go over to the Chase Center and imagine my experience on my phone where I can do anything I want. It's my remote control. So I think that's there's a hybrid model in there. I think with COVID, we're all in on the remote experiences. But yeah, I think that would be like the one tweak I would have to that.
Yeah. So I'll add another tweak, which is that it's definitely not obsolete, but it's more that the experience at home could pull together so many different elements of media that the stadiums yet have kind of figured out how to instrument, right?
Yes.
And what I think COVID is doing, which is a benefit to this industry, is it's starting to do something that I know both of you will play a huge role in the next few years, which is bringing together that in-stadium audience with the at-home audience. That concentric circle where those two overlap is a technology-powered experience. And it's not co-watching the way that we're experiencing it now, which is completely lame. It's a really powerful, immersive experience where both audiences are feeding off of each other. The signage in the stadium and the music at home and the music at home and the music in the stadium and the user-generated content that can proliferate in that community is incredibly powerful. And, Coca-Cola with their B-App experience where they just recently gave all these fans access to these artists was so compelling to me because it broke down the backstage experience, right? It was a digital experience where I got to feel like I was going backstage. I think it's probably a few months before we see something cool from Google where you're actually in the locker room, in the dugout, in the coaching box, something that gives me a very unique perspective from the baseball fans' point of view, and then brings together the reduced capacity crowds with the at-home crowds. So is there anything you guys want to share on that, or you got any plans? Anything under NDA that you want to share with our 100 people that are here? No. Okay, maybe not. What I was just teasing. We are wrapping up. So I wanted to give you guys the opportunity here to do something really, I think, compelling for our audience, which is paint the future of what the sponsorship industry looks like in your head 5 years from now. If things like we talked about today start coming fast and furious, which is brands get smarter, properties lean into co-development partnerships, and fans benefit from more personalized experiences. What will happen to the large impression-based brands, the brands that we're used to seeing at the halftime show, the brands that are used to putting their big signs in left field? What happens to them? Do they take a back seat to the technology brands, or are they still there? What do you guys think is happening with the sponsorship world? Augusto, you want to start?
Yeah, it's a $1 million question, right? So I think different industries are in different stages of acknowledgement and development and action, right? So that's the first thing. Second piece, it's going to include a lot of experimentation between the asset owners, the media companies, and also the product companies. But I think the future will be a seamless, personalized, integrated experience for the consumer, where if you plug into all these new technologies, right, VR and so forth, your experience will be materially better than if you just consumed it in the old way. Now, the challenge is the three incumbents, the asset owners, the media owners, and the producers, manufacturers, they have to work together in order to create this, because it has to be seamless, real-time, integrated, and also segmented, depending on the consumer. The tools are there, right? The question is, how are they going to work together where they can extract value for themselves, right? But at the same time, give disproportionate value to the consumer in a segmented way. So that's my soapbox.
That's okay. I dig it. And we have a huge piece of research on athlete-driven media where a lot of the partnerships that I think you're going to do, Augusto, too, is going to change the way that, the athlete is distributing your brand and things of that nature. So that is certainly coming from Coca-Cola and Powerade as well. Yeah.
Exactly. The actor in the play is the athlete.
Right. Kevin?
That's so eloquently put. I think the way that I see it is I don't necessarily see the old brands leaving, but I do see more of a mashup, a labyrinth where athletes are media brands, to your point, Josh, where, CPG brands are actually this cool digital experience and are almost in the tech world, where the tech world is just empowering it. Like, there's just this mashup. And I think when I think about the industry now, there's really stringent lines, right? Category based, that kind of thing. I think that's kind of a way of the past. And also the line between, like, say, sports and music and food and sports and like all that kind of stuff. It's really looking at the person holistically.
That's where most of the skepticism in this industry comes from, because you'll get the large brands that have already locked up their category exclusivity. And if I talk to Ricardo at Coca-Cola, who heads up sponsorship globally in sports, he and others who spend billions, right, in this industry to try to activate, say, look, we would like to have more of this give and take with our partners, but if we step away, there's always another check waiting. Right. And for this to fundamentally change, both sides of the equation need to be open to evolving the opportunity. And it's just so structural, right? There's these long-term deals, multi-year things. Everybody locks up their category. You're the official yogurt for as long as you want to be the official yogurt, and then they'll just go sell it to somebody else. So I think what we've touched on today is really sort of making the whole industry rethink things, but I also think there's a tremendous amount of inertia that's not going to move the ball forward unless there's some seismic change that we all see in consumer behavior, which is coming. I definitely believe that. So I like to wrap up with giving our guests, the last word. Is there anything that we didn't touch on? I apologize to Dina, Jeff, others that I didn't get to, Ronnie, I didn't get to ask your question, but you guys can pop over to our Slack community and we can continue the conversation there. But Kevin, Augusto, last word.
Yeah, I want to say that, to your point, just building on your point, it's the business models, right? So we have these long established business models and contracts that fundamentally have to change in order for us to take advantage of this new consumer and technology opportunity. And we see it in other categories, other industries. If we don't do that, we will be disrupted, and we won't know. It's some little company somewhere in the world that is trying to break this paradigm that will break it, and then the growth will be exponential, and then we won't know what's hit us. So it's incumbent upon us big players to start to at least experiment and to move away or change or experiment into other potential business models.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. I think from our side, respect the user, respect the opportunity, and respect each other is kind of our three mantras at Google. And I think the user in this case, being the fan, is going to be what dictates this change, in my opinion. You start to lose fandom, you start to lose the rest of those, impressions, and I think that's what breaks the model. Make a change.
Yeah, I wonder how far the industry needs to see that happening before there's some, and I think that's what everybody's looking for, which is where's the watermark on this thing. But two things I'll point to for my last word, which is there's a lot of money coming into sports now. A lot of like outside money, private equity money, SPAC, sort of structures for the way that the industry is going to operate. And you could have private ownership of these leagues soon in a way that like most people didn't understand before, which could be very fundamentally, different. So I say that as kind of like a thing to keep your eye on. And then you both touched on it, which is, and then there's the consumer behavior and value. If everything shifts more rapidly in that direction because of the small company that disrupts everything, figures something out on that platform, that linear broadcast just simply can't keep up, we're going to have that moment where things just go out of whack. And that might be the moment where hopefully those who have been reading the research and believing and drinking the Kool-Aid are prepared to move quickly. So listen, I want to thank you both, especially you, Kevin, getting up early, but Augusto, always great to talk to you. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you guys all for coming this morning and asking your questions. I apologize I didn't get to all of them. But again, join our Slack community on our website and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. You guys stay safe. Have a great day. And thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.